Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, the 24-25 NBA schedule has now been released literally minutes ago. So Camille and I sift through all those games for the Bucks, share our instant reactions, take yours as well. What stands out the most? What's the longest homestand? What's the longest road trip? Of course, we'll focus on those games with the Celtics and other notable matchups as we go over all things NBA schedule next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis, and we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel, as time to make every moment more. The playoffs have wound down, sports not sporting like we want them to, but all throughout the summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. So there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just head over to FanDuel.com to get started. Well, Camille, we guessed last week Thursday would be the day with just deductive reasoning of, well, you're past the Olympics. You don't really want to release a schedule on a Friday. Then we saw some other days set aside for not necessarily leaks, but official announcements of the schedule. We felt pretty confident, pretty good about that prediction. And here it is. It's Thursday afternoon. The schedule released, about 20 minutes ago. And we're going to get into the instant reactions here. Share yours as well in the chats, as I'm sure every Bucks fan has been on social media for the last 30 or so minutes, hitting refresh, waiting for this schedule to come out. But let's just start with what stands out the most. I'm going to go first, and I'm just going to say the start of the schedule, to me, was one of the more notable items. A very, very road-heavy slate for the Bucks to begin the season. 4 of their first 5 games are going to be played on the road. And not only that, there's a lot of tough competition on that schedule. I think it goes through the first 10 games of the season. You have a pair of games with the Celtics, 2 games with the Cavs, a game with the Knicks, a game with the 76ers, and a game with the Memphis Grizzlies, too, who we expect to be better than they were last season. So it's a lot of road games to start, and this could be a very, very challenging start to the season for the Bucks.
Yeah, nothing easy about it at all. Season starts off on the road in Philly, as we've discussed before. And then the home opener for the Bucks is against Chicago. So it made me laugh because me and you were going back and forth, like, who is that home opener going to be with? And we thought I was like, it's going to be the Pacers, isn't it? Ends up being a different Central Division rival with Chicago coming to town. But then, like you said, it's back on the road. Then you go at Brooklyn, at Boston, at Memphis, home against Cleveland, then at Cleveland, home against Utah, at New York, and then Boston for your first 10 games. Then your 11th game is the first one of the NBA Cup there. So not a way to ease into the season at all for the Bucks, but it is going to be quite a challenge to start. One thing that I did notice is the national games, because as we know, the Bucks are not playing on Christmas Day this year. They were not one of the teams that ends a 6-year streak for the Bucks on Christmas. And they have 27 national games this year, one less than what they had last year. So although we had those first round exits the last 2 years, the Bucks stars still have enough star power to get them on national TV for quite a few games.
Yeah. And that does include the what's the word I'm looking? It includes NBA TV as well, yes. Which ironically enough is the first matchup between the Bucks and the Boston Celtics is an NBA TV game, which I think raised some eyebrows. But as you pointed out when we were talking about this, Camille, it is night 2 of a back-to-back for the Bucks. So your first game against the Celtics carries that asterisk of, oh, by the way, you're coming off the road, or you're coming off of just playing the day before.
Yeah, that's a tough one. The very first matchup against Boston, a team that, as we know, defending champions, a team that's going to be a measuring stick for other teams in the East. first time you see them is the second night of a back-to-back, but also the fact that all of the Boston Celtics matchups are going to be done by December 6th is really interesting to me as well, because we know how much teams can change over the course of a season. Of course, with the trade deadline, but also just the chemistry and getting things together. So it's like you see Boston within your first 22 games, all the times you're going to see them for the entire year. And then after that, if you do meet in the playoffs, it is theoretically going to be like two different teams at that point, because so much more of the season has gone apart from there. I normally like to see teams earlier on and then later on, kind of to see where we were and then how we are now. But that is not going to be the case with Boston this year. And the home road splits with the Lakers, I think it was the Mavericks as well later on in the season, are really interesting as well.
Yeah, by my count, it was 15 back-to-backs that the Bucks have on this schedule. And you said it was what, 14?
14 last year. Yep.
So 15 of them this year, at least without us double checking the numbers and quickly going through. Not the easiest view to sort through this. So we're waiting on the calendar view for the schedule. Not to get too far off topic here, Camille, but you and I were talking about this before. It's entertaining. It's cute what NFL teams have done with the schedule release, how you turn a video into it. It's 17 games that we're talking about. I don't need it for an 82 game schedule. So I appreciate the creativity and the legwork that the Bucks social media put into it, but just give me the calendar view where I can view the schedule date by date versus saying, hey, here's a cheesesteak because we're playing Philly these times, and lobster bisque or a lobster roll for the Celtics. So we're still looking for that clean view, but I think what comes up next for given the time of year that we're in, for you especially, Camille, a lot of Bucks fans, is you now have the schedule out. So you start to look at that and then you wonder, okay, what conflicts do I have? What days are the Bucks playing where the Packers are also going to be playing? There's one very interesting potential conflict that's going to come a little bit later in the season. But when we talked about the way you start the season, the Brooklyn Nets home opener on October 27th, that is against the Bucks. The Packers also play that day. You'll have a chance to take in that game. It's an early game for the Packers in Jacksonville, and this is a 6 o'clock tip. So it's not too cumbersome with that. What's the word I'm looking for? With that conflict between the two. But the one that I alluded to before, Camille, I'll just rip off the Band-Aid and get to it right now. A marquee matchup, one of the ABC games that the Bucks have on their schedule. I say one of, it is the only ABC game, only one this year for the Bucks. It is against the Philadelphia 76ers at Fiserv Forum, and that is a 1 o'clock tip on Sunday, February 9th. Camille is an NFL person. You know why I bring up that date, because we're all in our love era and envisioning big things for the Packers. There's a chance the Packers could be playing in the Super Bowl that day, 4 hours after tip-off between the Bucks and the 76ers, which would set up for a pretty big day for all Bucks and Wisconsin sports fans. A big matchup with the 76ers earlier that afternoon, and then potentially the Packers in the Super Bowl.
Would love that. I love when the Bucks can be the sports appetizer for the Packers, or vice versa if it, the schedule plays out that way. So I love those days when both teams are playing, as long as it's not at the same time. When it's at the same time, especially for me, that's when I'm always like, okay, now I got to get another screen. I got to figure out how I'm watching two things at the same time. I'm trying to prioritize. So that would be lovely if we were in that love era and playing in the Super Bowl at that time. But to your point about that being the only ABC game, that is really interesting. I was trying to quickly count up the amount of NBA TV games that the Bucks have. And if my math is correct here, I believe that it's 9 NBA TV games for the Bucks of the 27 that they have a national game. So a national NBA TV team as well, the Milwaukee Bucks are going to be. And I do see, thanks to Q in the comments, mentioning that Eric tweeted out the calendar view. Eric Name did tweet out the calendar view, and taking a quick look at it, just the jarringness of seeing that opening schedule like we discussed. where you're like, okay, the season starts, and it's one home game for the Bucks in October to start the regular season off. But they do have a pretty decent home stretch here. Let's see, where is that at? In March for the team, or the road trip is in March, where they're on the road from the 18th of March through on to the 24th or 26th, where they play the Lakers on the road. Then they play the Warriors. Then they play the Kings. Then they play the Suns. And then they play the Nuggets before they come home to see the Knicks. So another long West Coast trip for the Bucks this year that isn't going to look to be any easier than last year's trip was, outside of the whole, having a new coach and switching that up. Hopefully that's not the case for the Bucks during this upcoming road trip this season.
You mentioned the longest road trip for the Bucks. As for the homestands, we'll take a view at that and some more breakdowns on the national broadcasts that the Bucks have coming up here this season. And of course, looking to hear your thoughts as well, as we're all sifting through this together. The schedule being released about 30 minutes ago. So leave your thoughts and anything that jumps out to you in the comments, and we'll get to those throughout this broadcast of the show. But we'll get into that split of the national games and the breakdown there coming up next here on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you now about our friends over at FanDuel. And look, we all love sports so much that we never want them to stop. But we've seen the playoffs wind down, and that means we're getting fewer games. The sports aren't sporting like we want them to. But FanDuel lets you keep sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily, so there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, Camille, by my count, it is 17 quote-unquote national games, if we remove the NBA TV games. So it is one ABC game, as we mentioned, and there are 9 ESPN games, 7 TNT games. The majority of those TNT games come in the close to the back half of the schedule. Their first is part of the NBA Cup. That will be that game in Miami on November 26th. The first time the Bucks are featured on TNT this season. They don't return there until January 23rd against the Miami Heat at home. So not only not a lot of ABC games, but the Bucks, not the staple on TNT that they once were either.
Hey, other teams are emerging. That's what I'm getting from this. And again, as we've discussed on previous episodes of just where the Bucks currently are with flaming out in the first round 2 years in a row, where you're just kind of like, there's some consequences that come with that, and the national TV schedule reflects that to a certain degree. But like I said, the star power of Giannis and of Dame, still keeps them on TV quite a bit. Just a few more NBA TV games along the way. I was also checking the calendar to see when we have the Mike Budenholzer return to Milwaukee, and it's looking like Mike Budenholzer's return to Milwaukee as the head coach of the Phoenix Suns comes Tuesday, April 1st. So that'll be the first time that Bucks fans can welcome back Coach Bud to Fiserv Forum.
Yeah, joke's on you, Bud. We missed you, and we shouldn't have fired you.
April Fool, we missed you actually all this time.
And I just got the press release now as we speak from the Bucks with some highlights to this schedule. So taking a look at games played by month, the most they will play in an individual month comes in January and March, where they play 16 games in each of those 2 months. They're both split 8 home and 8 on the road. The month that has the biggest shift in terms of home games is November, when the Bucks will play 14 games. 10 of those are at home. It's the opposite in October and December, when of those 5 regular season games to start out the season in October, 4 are on the road. And in December, the 12 games that they have scheduled, remember the NBA Cup comes into play here But so I believe it's just 10 technically that are scheduled, but they're going to play 2 others. So right now the split is 3 at home and 7 on the road. The other things that stand out here, you mentioned that road trip. 5 is the longest, and that comes late in the season or later in the season. It seems like that period on the calendar is always reserved for the West Coast road trips. And it seems like we always get one late January. Usually when you go out to Portland, and maybe Denver is on the trip then as well. And then the California trip always seems to come around the NCAA tournament in mid-March or so. It's basically where it lines up once again this season, with the that 5-gamer starting the 18th, as you mentioned, of March. But 4 is the longest homestand that the Bucks will have on the schedule this year. It was 6-game homestand was the longest a year ago, for the longest. And they have 2 of those this season, November 18th through the 23rd and January 14th through the 19th. So that November slate is the Houston Rockets. It should be a good one. The Houston Rockets, you have that border battle with the Chicago Bulls, the Indiana Pacers in one of the in-season, almost said it, NBA Cup games, and then the Charlotte Hornets. So that wraps up that 4-game homestand. And the other one that we mentioned in January, the Sacramento Kings, the Orlando Magic, the Toronto Raptors, and the Philadelphia 76ers. So it does seem like the marquee matchups this year so far are the Philly ones. I mean, that brings you the ABC game, that brings you your season opener, and it also kind of ties in with the fact that you only have 3 games against the Celtics and 3 games against the Knicks this year.
It does. And it makes me wonder, too. I'm curious to know from your end, which games on the calendar, the marquee matchups, are you most looking forward to seeing? Because one of the first that I went to is to see, when do we have the Wemby-Giannis matchup again? Yeah. And is that going to be a game that is on national television? And then you see their first matchup, which is Wednesday, January 8th in Milwaukee. It's on ESPN. That's the first matchup between the 2 teams this year. And then their second matchup in San Antonio comes a little bit later at the end of January, which is not a national TV game. So I was thinking Wemby-Giannis would be national TV, and at least that first matchup is. Outside of that one, I love that the very first matchup against the Pacers is an in-season tournament game. NBA Cup game, like you said. Old habits die hard. We got so used to calling it that last year, but their first matchup is an NBA Cup game, which, of course, there's going to be a lot of storyline around that. That's another game that's going to be highlighted on ESPN, and I can't wait to see that one. Although we've seen them so many times last year, ready to see them again. So those were 2 for me that I was like, when is Wemby coming to town, and when do we first see the Pacers?
The other thing that I had my eye on selfishly was late January to see. I do it every year. All right, are the Bucks going to play on my birthday? I think, based off some conversations we've had, Camille, I think your husband has the Wemby game as a birthday gift in San Antonio.
Yep. Which would be a fun trip. That would be a fun one. I hope he's getting any ideas listening to this for birthday gifts.
But yeah, it's. I think the immediate takeaways from this schedule are you start with how loaded it is to begin with Philadelphia on the road to open up the season. Memphis is going to be better. That's one of your road games. The Boston Celtics, a road game as well. I suppose the break that you get is we don't anticipate the Bulls are going to be better this year than they were a season ago, and the Nets have already waved the white flag. Those are the 2 games you have: home against the Bulls in your home opener, and on the road against Brooklyn. Those are the 2 games sandwiched in between at Philly and at Boston to open up your season. And look, if we're going to point out how difficult it is, that's one of the nice things, I suppose, is Brooklyn is already playing for Cooper Flag next season. And 2 of your first, 6 or 7 games of the season are against the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah, that definitely helps some. But then you take a look at how the schedule continues to unfold. I mean, one part of it is just that, as we've discussed before, there's a lot more talent spread throughout the NBA right now. So there's not as many, quote unquote, really bad teams that you're looking to play and like, yeah, that's an easy one. That's an easy one. Because to your point about Memphis, a team that was bad last year, but we know it was because of injury. You see them early on when injury shouldn't be a focal point for that particular team. So yeah, it's a start that is going to be challenging. And then I look at how the season ends for the Bucks as well. And just like when they start off that West Coast road trip that we mentioned, their longest one of the season, that's game 69 of the season for the Milwaukee Bucks. And then your final stretch there, again, on the road against the Lakers, on the road against the Warriors, on the road against the Kings, on the road against the Suns, on the road against the Nuggets, home against the Knicks, home against the Hawks, home against the Suns, on the road to Philly, on the road to Miami, home against Minnesota, home against New Orleans, and then you end the season with a back-to-back in the sense of not same day, but just a 2-game series against the Pistons where you're at Detroit, then you're back home against Detroit. And that is going to prove to be a difficult schedule to end the season as well when you're really trying to make that final playoff push for the team. So the Bucks are going to have to start strong and finish strong in addition to playing well in between time, of course. But those are going to be two really critical stretches for the team as they approach this season.
A couple other thoughts on what we see here with the schedule. We mentioned the number of back-to-backs, but some thoughts on the structure of those back-to-backs and a few other games worth noting. We'll get into that coming up next here on Locked On Bucks. And we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast, because there is no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We mentioned it was 15, I believe, for the back-to-backs on the schedule. What stood out to me the most about that, Camille, is, and granted, it's our first run through this, so maybe I missed one of them, but of the 15, 7 of them are home and home back-to-backs. So the majority of the back-to-backs that the Bucks are going to be playing in this season, they're at home for both games. So it's still certainly suboptimal to be playing back-to-back games, but if both of them are in your home arena and you get to sleep in your own bed, that's at least one advantage you can carry.
It helps a bit for sure, because when you're doing that on the road or having to travel right after a game to get to the next city, we know how much of an impact that travel has on the body as well. So yeah, I guess that's the bright side of those back-to-backs, to be at home, to be in your own bed for sure.
We mentioned the hopefully potential for a major conflict on Super Bowl Sunday. The other things that that stood out, especially for those Bucks fans in relationships where you're heavily invested in, hey, we're watching or hopefully listening to every radio broadcast. There is one stretch in the month of March where back-to-back weekends, the Bucks are playing Saturday, Sunday, eliminating any plans that you can have. So get everything in on Friday night. The first of those is the second weekend in March. So the 8th and 9th, and all 4 of these games are very interesting. Not ones that you're going to want to skip over. The Orlando Magic, a team that, we saw make some very big strides a season ago as a playoff team, and one that a lot of people are excited about, especially with the continued development of their young players. But you have a Saturday night game at home against the Magic, followed up by a Sunday night game at Fiserv Forum against the Cleveland Cavaliers. And then later that week, you have a Saturday night game at home against the Indiana Pacers, followed up by another Sunday night game at home against the Oklahoma City Thunder. That week, all told, is a lot of basketball, really that stretch of mid-March. And when we talked about that's where the 5-game road trip comes, but sticking with those 2 weekends specifically, you have a game Friday night, then a game Saturday or Sunday, then you get the day off, and then you go to Indianapolis to play the Pacers on a Tuesday. You get a travel day. Then you come back home for the Lakers on Thursday, then jump into another Saturday, Sunday back-to-back. Then you get a day off, and after that, it's that 5-game West Coast road trip. So the month of March, to me, is the one at first glance that seems like that's the most challenging month with travel and just how compressed all of these games are going to be.
Yeah, and it's quite a few back-to-backs, as you mentioned, during that stretch as well, with not a lot of time in between games. So looking at the start of the season and the end of the season, like the Bucks are going to have to make sure that they are not uh, losing games that they should be winning throughout the rest of the season, knowing how you have to start and knowing how you have to finish the season. I see Q in the comments as well mentioned the fact that one of the tougher back-to-backs looks like it's going to be November 7th against the Jazz and then away against the Knicks on the 8th, which, yeah, that's the travel for that one in particular is going to be tough there where you're in Milwaukee, then you head over to New York, and then you head back home to Boston, but then you get the 3-game home stretch at home. So that helps a bit. But looking at this schedule, I was trying to find like where is the easiest stretch of games based on last year. And we know things can change a lot from year to year with teams. A team that you think is going to be bad turns out to be a little surprise. So I'm not seeing a stretch in the schedule where I'm like, look, it's a whole bunch of easy games here for this particular team.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest stretch might be games 2 and 3 of the regular season, where it's your home opener against the Bulls and then on the road against the Brooklyn Nets. But, I think, look, a part of that is not just the draw. I mean, all teams are playing the same schedule. You'll have different teams that you're playing 3 times versus 4. But just the sheer fact that we started to have this conversation last year, and it's basically there yet of, look, how many teams do not expect to be playoff teams? When you look at the Western Conference, the Spurs were in that conversation last year. Yeah, it's not quite there yet. You got Wemby, but a lot to do. Then we saw Victor Wembanyama in his first season, and it was, okay, the Spurs might be a team that's fighting for that play-in tournament. So one by one, the Houston Rockets didn't make it this past season. They showed flashes a season ago. They expect to be there once more. The Memphis Grizzlies weren't a playoff team. They're healthy and theoretically much better. So the West in itself is going to be extremely challenging. In the East, you've seen a couple of teams take a step backward, but that's basically it. And I think that's part of the challenge, not just for the Bucks, for all of these teams is, gone are the years where you would look at least 3 to 4 teams and say, these are easy wins, whether it be for, scheduling purposes or whatnot. You don't have quite as many of those teams anymore.
You don't, because I'm even looking through the Eastern Conference trying to think of like what teams are those. The Pistons, for sure. Okay, like the Pistons, we know what they went through last season. You don't expect them to be a playoff team. They're going to be trying, I'm sure, to be a play-in team for what they have going on. Then you have the Wizards, the Hornets, the Raptors, and the Nets. Like those are the 5 teams that missed out on the whole play-in tournament last season. And you would look at them and think like they're probably going to finish around that same area this upcoming season. You might want to throw the Hawks into that category as well. But I mean, even if you get a Hornets team that's healthy with LaMelo Ball, we've seen how LaMelo can give the Bucks trouble in the past before. Like even some of those games there, I don't think are going to be necessarily super easy. But it will be really interesting just to see how this all turns out with more teams trying to get into that play-in. And also once we get that divide of which teams are like, hey, we're here for Cooper Flag, and Cooper Flag is all we're here for. And once that distinction is made and how that plays out towards the end of the year. But I also see as we wrap up, NBA Communications put out the Rivals Week, which is going to be January 21st through the 25th. And the Bucks are featured in Rivals Week. They are not playing the Pacers during that particular game on January 23rd. They're playing the Miami Heat, which is a team where, yes, there is a history there. But do you still think of the Miami Heat as the Bucks' biggest rival?
I mean, no, but I think the challenge to that is the teams that you would say, or the team, I suppose. The Boston Celtics have other rivals, right? The Knicks have other rivals. I think what you're going for, the obvious, would be the Indiana Pacers. So I'm a little surprised it's not that. But the Heat are on a short list, I would say. I'm just surprised you wouldn't really lean into everything that took place last year and say Bucks and the Pacers for rivalry week. Is that what you were getting at?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Or at the very least, I mean, the team they keep having us open the season up with, which is the 76ers, where it's like
and
there's the
same thing with Philly. Yeah, where I would assume they have, other options to sift through that are more appealing for television purposes than the Bucks. Your comment that you brought up before too, of trying to figure out what's the quote unquote easiest stretch of the schedule. I think we're gonna need to take a couple more passes through this before we really say, okay, this is it. But may I suggest the stretch from the week of Christmas, where the Bucks will not be playing this year. So I think it's December 23rd. From that date until January 6th, they have a stretch of 7 games here, and those games, 2 with the Chicago Bulls, 2 with the Brooklyn Nets, 1 with the Trailblazers, 1 with the Raptors, and then you have a game in Indianapolis during the day on New Year's Eve in there to round those out. So 6 teams that are probably not playoff teams in a 7-game stretch. That's probably going to be the easiest stretch that the Bucks have this season, assuming everything goes as planned.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you look at the game before that Chicago one on the 23rd, that's Washington at home. So that might be able to kind of kick off the quote unquote easy stretch for the Bucks on this schedule, because like you mentioned, we might take a couple passes through it, because I was looking at it like, woof. The way these games are spread out here, it's going to be a fun one. Some challenges for sure, but it should be fun given how this team, I don't want to say they feel slighted, but they've been saying some things from Dame, from Giannis, where you're just kind of like
a universal
they're
message
attention.
throughout the summer. Yeah.
Yes, they're paying attention to how the Bucks are being perceived.
We will get into that in more detail coming up on the official show for tomorrow. So this was basically a one-off for you, just to react to the NBA schedule and share our immediate thoughts on it, give you guys a chance to weigh in on that as well. Be sure to leave your comments in the video of when is the most difficult stretch for the Bucks on this schedule. Is that stretch we outlined in late December into early January? Is that the easiest? Any thoughts on the back-to-backs? The lack of ABC games as well for this Bucks team. So it's just been one slight after another here. No Christmas games, one ABC game. But leave your thoughts on the schedule now that it has officially been released. We will be back with another episode tomorrow. Some condensed thoughts on what we saw here from the schedule. And as Camille mentioned, we've heard seemingly a universal message from this team. We heard it from Doc Rivers. We heard it from Giannis. And now we've heard more of it from Damian Lillard, who shared some quotes. Jim Owczarski of the Journal Sentinel put together the story on Thursday, and some key takeaways that we'll get into on our show tomorrow. That will do it for today's show. However, thanks for tuning in. Be sure to stick around for tomorrow's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again then on Locked On Bucks.